But a lot of churches will have what I would call the sacred cow issues.
Yeah, sure.
So those sacred cows that can never be touched, never be changed. And
what are some of those in your church, Steve?
In our context?
No.
Now?
No,
Should we go?
Don't answer
Should we go? I get in trouble.
No, don't answer that. Welcome to the Grimké podcast.
Good to be here.
We actually just started live streaming right now. No, we're not doing that, but that's what's happening. I get to host today, and then I'm here with Dean Robinson of Grimké Europe, and also Dr. Andrew Newell. Glad to have you guys.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
A pleasure.
Pleasure, yes. We're here in Liverpool.
In Liverpool.
Yes, in the foyer.
There we go.
Is this the vestibule?
This is the vestibule. I like it.
So I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it.
This is where we do afternoon tea.
Yeah, I think I've had tea once or twice. When I come over here.
It is the best it's ever looked as well.
Yeah. We are talking about revitalization today, so we did do a little sprucing up, you might say.
Sort things out.
Well, that is the topic we gotta try to cover today a little bit, or just kind of wade into church revitalization. Where do you guys want to start? We can start with experience. You guys have had experience with planting, kind of replanting, revitalizing multiple churches, working with churches to revitalize, that sort of thing. What does that, some of those experiences look like a little bit?
Yeah, I think, so my experience is that's what we did right at the beginning. So we did I would actually call it, what we did was a replant. Okay. Which is slightly different to revitalization, which I guess we can talk about later. But
well, we can jump in now. You can go ahead and tell us now.
Well, I think the difference between replanting and revitalization is a replant is like literally what it will be. You're taking the same plant and you may repot it. You put new compost in. You're cutting a few bits away. But it's at a point where if it doesn't have that repotting, it's really gonna die. So that needs to happen. A revitalization might mean it needs a bit of water, a bit of food, bit of whatever. So in our context, we had,
it's like a full foundation rebuild. On the replant, you're tearing all the way down to the foundation,
right? All the way down, the way down. But you're tearing it down, but you're still using some of the good components that are there.
That's good. Yeah,
I think. So what we did that 2009, the group of 15 people in a Brethren assembly, by God's grace, they were good, godly, faithful people. Wanted to see something happen. I went with a team of people, and together we worked with them. We didn't change the name of the church. We met in the same building. But there was some fundamental changes that occurred. There was new compost put in, once for better freezing, and then over time, things began to become more healthy. Yeah,
it's more of a replant. Revitalization will be, kind of a more working with and bringing. The thing, even definitionally, Dr. Noah, you have to clarify for me, but the revitalization has like a derivative in like revivification.
Yes,
sometimes basically bringing fresh life to something.
Yeah, vitality.
Okay,
life.
Yeah. So that's kind of what you're doing. You're working with what's there, but you're also doing a deep kind of work pruning to instill a lot of life that's kind of dwindled in a different capacity.
Yeah.
For people who are watching, perhaps in the United States or elsewhere in Britain, who don't understand the exact kind of minutiae of what you've just said, what's a Brethren assembly like?
A Brethren assembly,
which is what you were called into.
Well, it is a soiree a little bit, because every endeavor to plant a church, revitalize, or do a continued work is always related to, the people you're dealing with and how they're organized and how they see themselves. So
because it's not,
Brethren replant will be different.
We're not just talking about you're not just talking about bringing in an electric guitar.
No, not at all. So
what do we call that? Is there a technical definition of that?
I don't know.
Re-enspicement, maybe.
Re-enspicement.
I don't even know if that's a phrase, but basically just add that juice to the top. It's like we would say the stateside, it's like Miracle Grow.
Miracle
If you add the electric guitar and the kick drum,
we're away.
You're in.
We're away.
Exactly.
We're happening.
I don't know if that's right.
But it's really, we laugh about that. I know that's interesting, but I think sometimes we even, I think some people just think, well, all we need to do is get in a pulpit and preach the faithful gospel and it's all going to be okay.
Well,
and
yes.
don't get me wrong. That's very important and it's the center of the wheel. But there's other things that you've got to consider.
A lot of churches that just get up and continue to preach from the scriptures every week need a revitalization.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. So there's a thicker ingredients that kind of
no less than that, but there is a thickening off the back of that.
Yes.
It's the center of the wheel.
Yes,
but the wheel is the whole piece
Yes.
of what it means to be God's people in the church.
Good.
We're going to take a minute to interrupt the podcast for a special announcement. I want to invite you all to the men's conference that we're having this summer in Richmond, Virginia, July 28th through 30th. It is for all men in your church, not just ministry leaders or pastors. We hope you all will come out. We're calling the conference Christianity Tomorrow, Hope in Compromised Times. I think we all recognize how compromised our culture is on so many biblical truths, not the least of which is masculinity. So we hope to provide some clarity along with some brotherhood and have great content from some great speakers, many of whom are professors who join me around this table. To get your tickets or to find out more, go to our website, grimké.org/tomorrow. Hope to see you all out there.
So to your point, to your question, so a brethren assembly, so it was interesting. So the brethrens effectively were a break off of autonomous independent churches from the established church.
Okay.
And it comes through like the conviction of
so more local autonomy.
Local autonomy, but also for where they would be is that the priesthood of all believers across the church, plurality of elders.
Yes.
So there wouldn't be any paid elders or a pastor or lead pastor, and that was a complete move away from that. And there were different brethren assembly. So you had the Plymouth Brethren, which would have been, and the exclusive brethren, which would have been very, very strict in that sense. And if anyway, would completely segregated from the life of sort of the world.
Okay, yeah.
But
so it's more of a flattening of the historic hierarchies,
totally
leveling in across the
and that works itself out on a Sunday morning, because in a sort of classic brethren assembly, there won't necessarily be a sermon.
Okay,
right? You'll have different elders or men will just stand up at different points and will give a word from what they've been reading or what they've been thinking about, and you will have multiple, that will happen multiple times, and that's what a service looks like, right?
So not as much role differentiation in terms like formal recognized, pastors and in terms of their responsibilities. It's more uniform.
It's more uniform across it. And then what would happen is you would have men within the eldership who were particularly gifted and were able to preach, and in one sense, without the role, they would probably take the lead in the Bible teaching.
Right.
But I think in a lot of the assemblies, especially in Liverpool, over time, what happened is they would have a circuit of preachers that were used to just bounce around and preach in different areas. So from the get-go, you didn't have regular pastoral Bible teaching from shepherds that were amongst the sheep in that context. Really interestingly, though, the Brethren Assembly, they were autonomous churches, independent churches, but they were well connected.
Okay, yeah.
So well connected in terms of they used to do camps together, missions together. They used to do tent missions. Okay. So on the parks, get big tents, effectively like the Crusades, I guess, that they would do in the States.
Yeah. And
people would get saved off the back of them. Right. And in Liverpool and in the Merseyside region especially, and I think a lot of other working class towns across the north of the UK especially, there were lots of brethren assemblies.
Yeah.
So little gospel halls, they would be everywhere. A large emphasis on children as well. Okay. Children and the breaking of bread, which would be communion. So the main service would be taking communion together, and a big emphasis on Sunday school for children.
Oh, Sunday school, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was like fully integrated, kind of where everybody's in, or?
Yeah, and everything was based around the meeting and around the building. So in a sense, there was communal life, community life, but that community life was based around any meetings that you would attend or any activity in the life of the church, not in a general sense around. And a lot of those churches were full and booming for many years, but over time they've declined. So it was interesting. I would say the Brethren Church and the Brethren movement was probably the first step, definitely over the last 100 years or so, 150 years, where you see a real rollout of independent churches. Independent churches. So you will have churches that aren't brethren by way of theological conviction that would function in terms of the life of the church like a brethren assembly.
So you guys had a nucleus that was there. How long had the church existed before you guys
1933.
Wow. Yeah.
So 1933,
80 years or so.
Yeah, a group of men had decided in the area where we are that it was interesting. So what they would start was they wanted to have a breaking of bread service. That's what it was. So it wasn't we want to plant a church. In one sense, it wasn't that we wanted to reach people with the gospel, even though I think that was there. I think that was an assumed. It was we want a breaking of bread service.
Yeah.
So we're going to break bread together in this community, which would be, and on one level, when you think about it, it's beautiful because there's that sense of the breaking of bread, that display of the wonder of the gospel in the context of a community where that is not happening. And it happened here. So that's 1933. In 1945, they bought a little building in the area. It was an old Welsh Presbyterian church, and they bought it for £400, I think it was.
Wow.
In 1945, and then on that site.
So you guys paid for this historic building? £400.
Well, actually, wasn't that much more, to be fair.
That's right,
But what happened was then they met in that building. They rebuilt the building in 2000. But over time, the church was just in decline. And what you'll find is that Ramley's Road Chapel, which was the church, you could repeat that many times all around the city, and you still can. And I think also even within sort of the more obviously non-brethren, but sort of the your reformed, independent sort of networks of churches, a high proportion of that network will be made up of smaller churches that are struggling in some sense, that would probably say they need some form of revitalization.
So that nucleus, what were some of the challenges that you guys faced initially to replant and bring about new life essentially in the church? Because every approach, whether it be replanting or revitalization, has certain unique circumstances given the people that are there, the history that's there, the changing context that are there, those sorts of things. What distinctly were some of the things that you guys faced early on, maybe?
So I think that one of the biggest challenges is so the biggest challenge, which I think they came to at the beginning before we even came, which I think was helpful, that a lot of churches struggle to get to, is that they realized that they needed replanting. They needed revitalization. They didn't use that phrase. They needed help.
Yes.
That's what they were saying. We need help. So it's like getting,
So you can't force the church to revitalize. They have to come to some type of realization that
they have to.
They have a need to
help. But they also, you need to come to that realization. They need to come to that understanding that they need help against some sort of measurement, some sort of barometer. Now, sometimes they're not the right measurements.
Sure,
but they are a great indicator. So I think in the Ramley's Road case, they came to realize that the people weren't coming to the church, people weren't being saved, and people were leaving. And the younger people were leaving. And when I say younger, these people were like in their 30s and 40s. They were leaving. So what is the future of the church? Where are we going to be? Now it was like, we need help. So I think the help is we need more younger people to come and help us do ministry. And I think some of the challenge, so that was great. So it's like anything, think about our own health. You know what I mean? You come to realize that you are becoming maybe less healthy as you get older against maybe, 2 years ago, you were lifting these weights, now you can't. You were doing this, now you can't. But actually, the rooted issue is less to do with the fact that you can't lift as much as you used to. There might be other things going on.
Yeah. You a lot of times the recognition that you need help is a start, but sometimes the steps towards getting help, churches that need revitalization aren't the best ones to actually understand how to meet the needs, or actually to get the help they need, because it's kind of why, in many ways, they need revitalization, because they weren't actually able to meet those challenges. I remember we met years ago with a church that was seeking to be, basically, they wanted to be revitalized, but as we talked with them, they're down to about 20 people. And as we met with them for about a year and a half, what became apparent was they did want, they knew they were struggling, needed help, but they also couldn't get past the fact that they assumed they knew exactly what they needed. So they wanted essentially us to come in and provide assistance towards their plan of improvement. That actually was the plan that actually led to their needing for revitalization, their unhealth. So it was a difficult. They had 20 people, and I think at the time they had well over close to 30 or 40 committees that they were seeking to fill.
Wow.
So there was not much of a thought of like maybe this is a time where we could cut down on committees. Maybe we just cut them in half, maybe one committee per person or something like that. It just didn't occur. So they're like, it'd be great if we could backfill all these ministry structures that actually been too cumbersome and actually led to the decline of the church in a lot of ways. So they have to have a certain type of recognition and then a humility.
That's right. And I think that's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is when we say we need help or the church needs revitalizing, is trying to find out what they're saying. Right. And if it's, can you come and help us continue what we've been doing for years?
Right, that's right.
Then there's something not right. Or it's, can you come and help us figure out why we're in this situation and then help us. And that's what I've had to do many times in other contexts. Can you come and help us figure this out?
Yeah.
And then when you get below the surface, you're able to see what the issues are and the difficulties are in that case. And so one of the challenges is working with people and working with leaders that were leading the church towards that decline. That's really difficult.
Right.
So what you do is they're making a great decision to say we need help.
Right.
But at the same time, they're the ones that have been leading it in that direction. And then suddenly they wake up and the wonder of the gospel and the grace of God is that even as leaders, we're making the wrong decisions and done decisions. There's always, Jesus is always like, look, I can help you.
Right.
We can do this. I think you see that in Revelation, chapter 2 and 3. He talks to 7 churches. 5 of them he's pursuing. And he's pursuing them all, but 5 of them there's that sense of, look, you think about Ephesus. You've lost your first love. All that sorts of stuff. But this is a great Bible church. Right. These people love the word. They know the word. We would look at it and go, oh, that's the type of church we need to be part of, especially in our context. They handled the word correct. It's expository Bible teaching. There's no love there. And Jesus says, if you don't get that back, I'm going to remove that lampstand. So, but what he's saying is, get that back. We can get there. We can get there. And I think that there's a pursuit in that context. So I think, but when you come in, it's hard to work with folk to do that. So there's a sense of like, we need to dig deep, start afresh, and rebuild together, and recognize where there's been a neglect, there's a lack of gifting, there's a misunderstanding, or even sin that has been going on that needs to be rooted out and changed to then move forward.
There's definitely a love and sensitivity. I was thinking about what Paul talks about, the dynamic between older and younger men. So you're not younger folks that are bringing maybe some vitality or some assistance to a church that's been laboring in the gospel for many, many years.
That's right.
Essentially, you're coming. You're not coming. You don't rebuke the older man. You're coming there to encourage. As a fellow brother, to build up, maybe to instruct in certain ways. But there is a deferential sensitivity that you may have as you're working with sweet folks that recognize their need for help. But the manner in which you actually come alongside to assist them is very sensitive to how do I care for them to also help bring them along to receive the help and it be a mutually beneficial. So that's something you would add to that?
Yeah, I think that's such a key sort of, I think then how that balances then against this brand new moment that we're walking through, especially in the West, as a culture, which is that's informed by technology. Then on the other hand, young people, perhaps for the first time in history, feel as though they have the answers to the problems of the older generation. And
well, they have AI now, which basically solved all of our problems.
well, indeed. But the point, but actually, just to that point, I mean, previously, certainly, just let's talk about on this island. Previously, what most people did for work is they did what their dad did,
right,
or they did what their mum did, and so what that meant was, at a certain age, and it would probably be quite a young age, you begin to go to work with your dad, and your dad shows you how to do the things that make for work for this particular vocation that he is working in, and he brings you into the community of men, all the other blacksmiths,
right,
and you feel yourself to be very much the junior, and you slowly learn then. By process, you're slowly you're sort of induced into a culture, and through this process, you learn how to become a blacksmith. And basically, by the time you are in maybe your late 30s, at this point you're a man. At this point, you have the solutions to the problems, and people will turn to you. This is described really beautifully, actually, by. There's a poem written by Seamus Heaney where he talks about this, and he talks about his father at the plough, and he talks about him following after his father as a child. Yeah. But then he talks about, by the end of the poem, his father is now an old man. Yeah. And Heaney is now pushing the plough, and his father is there at his elbow, sort of irritating him a little bit, going, "Oh, you're not quite doing this right," or whatever. So, but now we're in this position where I think, especially in the last 20, 25 years, because of technology, young people have been much more agile and are naturally much more agile to be able to pick up new types of technology. They pick up a phone, they know how it works. Oh yeah. Parents find themselves in a position where their child is coming and sort of going, "Well, you don't understand how to use this new piece of thing. You haven't closed all the apps on your phone. You haven't downloaded the update. This phone is so out of it." Just these very small things. And then in the workplace as well, I think people find themselves. There's younger people who are coming in and who, for example, know how to use ChatGPT and are doing things much quicker. And people who are in their 40s and their 50s don't quite know how to use it. And, so we're in this really strange moment in history where things have flipped, where young people have, for the last 20 to 30 years, been showing older people how to do things. And this has led to, I think, a series of catastrophes in our culture. It's led to a loss of confidence for parents. You have your child coming down out of their bedroom. They've been there for 3 months on their computer, and they've downloaded a whole bunch of new information into their brain that they are now presenting to their parents. Their parents are blindsided by this. I think it works itself out in so many different ways. Yeah. So just as you guys are talking, that insight from Paul as he's writing to Timothy is so key, isn't it? Because he says, he's talking about how a younger person ought to interact with an older person when you're going in to try and assist in some kind of way, and that it should be very much deferential, and also understanding that the people you're going in to help, that there's deep wisdom in there, and which from what I've heard you talk about in the way that you went in, that was a real process, wasn't it, of working with the people who were there, and respect and deference.
Well, the cultural challenges, we have unprecedented rapid cultural change.
That's the difference.
Throughout history. So churches trying to accommodate well to continue to further the gospel mission in a culture that changes that rapidly, creates the circumstances that bring about maybe even expedite decline in these churches, needing revitalization towards the end. As you were talking, I was thinking, I don't know about you, Steve, I've reached the age that I go to my kids first for a lot of my technological helps. So they're kind of my IT department a little bit on certain fronts, and I kind of love it.
Yeah.
But also it does make them realize how irrelevant I am and how much I don't get sometimes. What it can possibly have that effect. So imagine older, folks trying to accommodate to reach the younger generations with all of this cultural change.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of nuance and a lot of thought in terms of how you revitalize or bring new life into the church.
It's a good model because I think it's a good example because it's simultaneously true that a younger person can help out an older person. They can have things to contribute.
Right.
But it's also been, I think, really unhelpful and detrimental just culturally. And that there's a whole bunch of people now, my age and younger, who just think that they have the answers to the questions.
Yes.
And that actually older things, whether that's people or ideas, systems, etc., that these have no value, and these are to be kind of washed away. And we are the experts. We're the people in the room.
Yeah.
And it's from all the times I've heard you talk about revitalization and replanting, like, well, it's definitely not like that. Actually, it's actually a very complicated process of give and take and of learning and the rest.
It's Alan Kreider in his book, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, which is really interesting. So he talks about how the church grew so rapidly and quickly in the first 300 years of its existence under the persecution, immense persecution. And the two words that he concentrates on is patience and fermentation.
Okay.
And the whole thing of patience is so important. You know, rapidly moving culture, if you're going to be involved in church revitalization, I want to take it a step further. If you want to be involved in church planting, you've got to be patient.
Right.
And there's a patience element because what patience says is that it's not about me. It's not about what I do. It's about waiting on God.
Right.
And in God's timing. And then if you're doing a church revitalization with folks that may not be up to date with the systems and structures or the communication elements that you want to bring into that new church, there's a patience that needs to occur there. But then also theologically, I think there needs to be a patience.
Yeah.
So in our context, there were folks who had a certain convictions around certain theology, and some of them really held to that. Held to that and understood why they held to that. Whether I agreed or not was irrelevant, but they had that conviction. But there were other folks that said they held it, but actually they didn't know why. So even the patience of walking through theologically with people and showing them the conviction, a conviction that's rooted in scripture of what it is to be the church, what is the gospel, what is our calling, what are we, who are we as the church, and then who are we in terms of our mission with different people. So I think what happens is people want to jump over that work and just put the constructs of ministry in place. So we're going to revitalize this church. I tell you what this church needs. It needs a guitar. It needs some drums. What it needs is a kids ministry. We need to revamp this building. All these sorts of things, which may help for a time.
Sure, yeah.
But but actually they're not the things that ferments.
Yeah, that's right.
In the body of Christians in a community that actually makes a massive impact in context. So I think in a revitalization process, there is an element of patience and an understanding that there's a fermentation that happens over time. So you know, all of the original 15 people, when we arrived, the two have gone to be with Jesus.
Okay.
Two have gone to be with Jesus. Two have retired and moved to the Lake District, which is just the north of England. And the rest are all still with us.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
But to see their growth, to see and these are all people in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
See their growth, see their love for the church, their understanding of the gospel, and to see the fruitfulness of their lives amongst a much larger church and network of churches is something that only patience and the fermentation of the gospel in the life of people happen. Yeah, I think that's really important. That I think the younger generation needs to get a hold of.
Yeah. The work that's required is always related to what you're working on. The church is a unique organism.
That's right. Yeah.
It is a social entity. It is a body. It is a people. So growth, health, new life, renewal that Christ brings, by definition, takes patience, because it's a long work that God does in us over a lifetime.
That's right.
So the kind of a lot of the rapid cultural change in society can give the appearance of rich growth or renewal, but we have to realize how those things actually relate to bringing health to the body.
Yeah.
The technological advancements like tools, I think it was Lewis that mentioned that technology is really like a magic trick. So technology is like a magic way for us to kind of hack reality and try to make it conform to our will. Where it's actually the other way around, is actually the way the world works is the way God has designed it.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, whatever tools or technological advancements we have, or even innovative ministries, techniques that we bring in, whether it be, guitars and amplification, or certain, aesthetic improvements, those sorts of things always are in service to rightly building up a people that requires patience, because the church is a people.
Absolutely.
So if you miss that most fundamental ingredient in actually seeing the church, seeing life come to a church or revitalization, then no matter what techniques you use or getting with the times, if you will, those won't bear lasting fruit, and you'll find yourself in a place of not actually overall growth and health that's good gospel growth.
So it's interesting because of what God's done here at Cornerstone, Ramleys Road Chapel became Cornerstone. We get asked a lot to work with other churches, and it's interesting based on our experience. I have 5 C's that I think are helpful to think through.
Yes.
So 5 C's.
So you guys are a Baptist church now, not a
we are. That's what it is.
with the alliteration.
But there's 5 C's that actually I think help us walk through the patience.
Yes.
And I think that's important, because I think this could be helpful for anything. And we try and revisit these things all the time, because revitalization, I think, is an ongoing process. So you have, and I'll just talk about 3 of them for now. So you have conviction, culture, constructs, conflict continuously.
Okay.
So the first one, conviction. So the conviction is right back down to what I said before, the gospel, who we are as a church, what does the Bible say?
That's right.
What is going on there? Let's get underneath the hood and write down what's happening here. Why are we in this? Why have we gone down? Why have we found ourselves here?
Yeah.
Because 30 years ago, we went a degree here.
That's right, yeah.
And now we're here. Or we totally misunderstand this, or whatever that may be.
Any life in the church has to be grounded on God's word.
100%.
Yeah, it starts and finishes there.
100%. But I think we assume that rather than live in that.
That's good.
So I think what happens is when we revitalize churches or even plant churches, we just assume that. I've been to seminary, I know stuff, yada, yada, yada. Of course we're going to be gospel. But what we need is, we're going to have the best X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I think we have to sit in the conviction, work in the conviction, make sure your elders are there, and then the core people in that church that are going to be part of the life of seeing that happen. So conviction is important. And then you flow from conviction into culture. And I use the word culture in the sense of, okay, so this is our conviction. So what does that look like?
Yeah. Right.
What does that mean? What does that mean for us now? How are we going to live? What does that mean for us as the culture of the church, as the Bible describes, in the culture that we find ourselves in?
Yeah.
So when we first went to Ramleys Road, they initially said, we're going to start a kids ministry. Are we going to start a kids ministry? And I said, no.
Right.
Because we only had 3 kids and 2 of them were mine. And they were toddlers. So and it was a different sort of community, but all they'd ever known up to like 10 or 15 years, because there weren't any kids, was we always do stuff for kids.
Yeah.
When the reality is, no, of course we're going to do stuff for children, but let's put it in let's figure it out in light of our convictions, who we are, where God has us, and what the situation. So what that does is you build from conviction into culture.
Yeah.
What do we want this to look like?
Yeah.
What, in light of what we believe the Bible's saying. And then the 3rd C, constructs. So I use constructs instead of like ministries or programs, or even operational stuff. What are the things that we need to put in place in order to help us live out these convictions.
Yeah, to create that culture. Yeah, what are the constructs that are necessary to actually facilitate?
You need the trellis.
Well, you only have the trellis. You only have two kids, and then one other. You don't need a full-fledged trellis for children's ministry.
We don't need to employ a children's.
But for the church to be thriving, there should be new marriages, families being created. That therefore presents the occasion for healthy culture in the church of new life. That's right. Multi-generationally. And then what constructs do we need to facilitate that? So, and what's really, I think too many churches too, I mean, are sometimes guys that are very convictionally driven. I think they're apt to miss where you're about to go because they do great at the conviction, have rich theological underpinnings and understands the foundation of everything, and I love God's word. And then I also understand that should produce a certain type of people. It should look a certain way as far as how we live this gospel out. But the means by which that culture is produced or facilitated through constructs tends to be missing, though.
Okay, so I have 2 questions, if I may. So the first question is...
Well, you can't. You can do it. Yeah. Go ahead.
If I may.
Okay. You may, of course.
So you said there about people came to you and they said, we need a kids ministry. And you said, no. Now,
is this a question? Is that actually exactly how you said it?
No, I'm doing this for the audience. I'm taking them back.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
And then we're gonna press into just this.
I don't know if this got into the nuance of tone. Yeah. Tone.
No, don't worry. It's just how you do podcasting. I don't know, okay. So that no. What did it look like to arrive at the no? So I imagine sometimes, because obviously I know you quite well.
Yeah.
So sometimes with you it's just no. Because you've got the convictions sorted, like they're sorted. You've got them down. You know what they are. You've got them down as a team.
Yeah.
And so you just know, you're like, no, that doesn't fit with our convictions. Like that would be, and we have experience now. We've been doing this for however many years. That's not the kind of thing that we need to be doing. Sometimes people will doubtless bring things to you and you think, well, maybe. And you'll take time to think over that and you'll come to a no or a yes. Back then, when you're right at the beginning, you're dealing with this church that, just for context, like they had Ramillies Road in the 50s. They had a kids ministry. They had a Sunday school kids ministry that had like hundreds of kids coming, like hundreds. Yeah. So to them, and the people who were in the congregation at the time, many of them were right. A number of them would attend those, and that's actually how they came to faith. A couple of them, right? So this is so
it's a stronger no than you might have been intending.
Yeah,
because this is the pathway for us to see a lot of fruit bore out.
This is so ingrained in the culture of their church, and for many of them, I wonder they will have been thinking, we're bringing in these people to bring back these good old days. Do you remember when we had 200 kids?
Yeah.
And that's that's to us what flourishing looks like. So, and for you, as you're just in the door, and you're having to have chats about, well, actually, there's going to be one sermon preached, and we're going to start to sing some of these songs. Actually, as you're beginning to go through this process of change, and you're having to arrive at no, yes, we'll keep that. Just what does that look like? How did that feel?
Yeah, how did you arrive at the particular conclusions? How did you decide what constructs do we need and which ones do we?
And what does the no look like?
Personally, I don't know. I have no idea what that no look like, but I tend to encourage folks to relativize to the positive. If this
That's a classic Brian Loughlin phrase. I love that.
I think it's accommodating and loving is it's never really a no. It's a yes to something better.
Nice.
Okay. Which therefore, because the heart always behind helping folks, and this might not have been at all how this related to what you guys did, but I'm trying to assess the heart of folks that want to see something wonderful for Christ realized. And that provides the opportunity to say, well, let's discuss how we might do that in the best way now. that's most fitting and helpful. And so it's never really a blunt no normally, unless it's direct heresy. But I think what we're reaching for there and what will be most fitting and even better is X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm never a no. It's always a yes to possibly something more glorious, which is an implicit no. Yeah. But you might have just told him no. That doesn't make any sense.
No. No. So I think every conversation we had, and I think every conversation we continue to have, and every decision that was made and is made, is grounded in biblical conviction.
Yeah.
Biblical conviction and biblical conviction and who we are and where we are. I think that's really important. Really, really important. So and that then, if you have biblical conviction and it's clear and you can show people that, and you know who you are and where you are in the context of time and place, I think that's really, really important. Really important. You can shepherd people there. So when I said no, it wasn't like they came to me and said, "Could we do?" No, we're not doing that. That was a course of conversation and conversations that showed them where we were as a church.
Right.
And a kid's ministry is a vital part of the life of a church. Of course it is.
It's not where we are. Yeah.
And we will have one.
Yeah.
But it's not where we are now.
Right, yeah.
Where we are now is we need to do this and work here. And the children that we have at this moment in time, I'll take responsibility for my kids. And that guy will take responsibility for his kids.
That's good.
And which actually showed that the primary place where kids are discipled is in the home.
So you have another question. We don't forget that. We got 2 more C's, and we still got to unpack constructs. Well, so just keep us going. The constructs matter as far as timeliness.
But it's interesting. It speaks into this stuff as well. Yeah. So you've got your constructs then make sense.
Yes.
So they make sense as a church.
Given the season and time.
Given the season and time.
Yes.
Given the and what that means is that the constructs can change. One of the reasons why churches get into a point of revitalization is that they're not willing to change.
Yes,
and they never change.
I remember one of the saddest days was, I got 4 kids. They're all getting a little older. My youngest now is 11, and we had this old crib that we've been given to us, and it served us well. It was kind of like next generation hand-me-down was great, but it wasn't going to make it to my kids. And I took it, and it wasn't worth reappropriating towards any other means. So I remember I took it out in the alley and I broke it into pieces and threw it away. And
why? Why did you break it into pieces?
Because I had to break it down to get it in the dumpster.
Okay,
it wasn't just I got violent on it. I didn't have like a.
There's no coming back.
This is what I always wanted to do, but it was a closure on that season. So there was, we didn't just continue to have a room in our home just set aside for cribs and rockers because those constructs were already utilized for that season to build them up. Yeah. But since it was a new season, they wouldn't have been fitting anymore. So it has to be, church as a family and a people. The constructs, the timeliness of it is very important.
So I think most church planters, lots of church planters and revitalizers and just churches always think constructs first.
Yeah.
They think when it comes down to even staffing. So it's like, I'm a pastor. Well, my first appointment has to be a children's worker or a women's worker or whatever worker. Yeah. And why? Because that's what people tend to do.
Right, yeah.
And rather than, okay, what are the convictions where God has you? And then let's build from there.
That's good, yeah.
And then whatever ministries are. And so we do church in a certain way based on the convictions and the culture, and a culture that we want to see, but also a culture where we are. And when you sit down with people, it makes sense. They see that. Right. They see the reasons why we're moving in that direction. So what's interesting is the next C, which is an ongoing C through all revitalization, is conflict.
Well, if I come back, we sit a little longer because conflict does come out of creating the culture and therefore right use of constructs. But you're exactly right. The folks normally jump to constructs first instead of saying actually, what are our base understanding of God and who He is and from His Word, and then what does it look like to form a people? I remember the church we actually planted out of actually went through some transitions over the years, but they had when their senior minister transitioned, they brought in a younger guy, and it was a large suburban contemporary church. But this was one of the let's say unintended missteps that he had made. Was instead of primarily focusing on how do I make disciples and bring enrichment and life to this people through maturation of the gospel, he immediately did a lot of constructive changes to the environments. So that if only our foyer had a little bit more updated furniture, and if we just had a little bit better aesthetic on the stage. And so we started moving furniture around in the house before he got to know everybody, and said, hey, this is going to be wonderful. We love people. How are these constructs actually means to facilitate life that are fitting? Because ultimately those are not what's primary. And too many times when we jump to those, it's a problem. And I also think it's worth noting, we're not saying that they don't matter.
No.
So kind of, I remember President Logan was worked with a lot of churches to do revitalization. One church that he was working with, literally, they didn't clean their bathrooms well. And the bathrooms themselves emanated a certain aromatic tendency as everybody was gathering. That was, you might say, more than offensive.
Okay.
But he could not wonder, he couldn't wonder, like, they'd be reaching out and they'd be inviting folks out and have new people. Nobody stayed. And Dr. Logan said, well, it's because it stinks in here.
Yeah.
It smells like urine in your church.
That's right.
We can't, so you got this beautiful aroma of Christ that's getting, basically the aroma of excrement is overwhelming everyone. And they can't handle sitting here and gathering for the joy of the Lord because it smells like a bathroom in here. So let's clean this place up. And then people, so it does matter.
I actually think if you get it in the right order, it matters. You actually take it more seriously.
Yes.
So, and that's the issue. I think if you think it's the constructs are the primary means by which your church is going to be revitalized or grow or be effective.
Yeah.
If you think the trellis is the main deal,
that's right.
You've got it wrong.
Right.
But if you don't have a trellis,
right.
It's just
a wild vine everywhere.
Yeah.
And then
so actually,
chaos and conflict come out of it.
Yeah, but then you shape where your trellis is going to be in order for that growth to happen well. So,
right.
So in our context, I think we really think hard about constructs.
Yeah,
we really think hard about our constructs because it's flowing out of conviction and culture, which are the important things. Right. So, and the construct, it's ministries, but it's also like I remember I've been to so many churches and the revitalization, and the first thing they want to talk about is becoming their own, revamping their charitable status or becoming, because they think if we do that'll really help us, which no, it won't. However, however, that is something you've got to think about, and it's really important, and you need to do it really, 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 really well.
Yes.
But don't lead with that.
That's right.
Lead with this.
Yeah.
And I think there are too many assumptions made of biblical gospel conviction and culture of people in churches and actually people going into ministry.
Right.
Too many assumptions being made rather than let's just get it out on the table and go, where are we?
Right.
What is happening? What do we believe? What do we want that to look like?
Yeah.
And therefore our constructs aren't thought through well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That leads really well into the other question I was going to ask, which is, so it seems to me that really, what the gospel is about is restoring a relationship with God that then enables restoration and reconciliation. Reconciliation with God.
Yeah.
That then enables reconciliation and restoration with one another. That is experienced on a normal Tuesday in November.
That's right.
It's life together. And so the relationship is the first piece and is just kind of like the foundation in terms of the Christian experience.
Absolutely.
It's relationship with God and with other people, right? Which is
right.
That text in Revelation is just, you've forgotten your first love. It's you're in relationship with me. I brought you into a relationship with me. And then the constructs are just necessary, and God actually gives us constructs. You know, in the Bible, God says you need constructs. Eldership is a construct that God has given, and He says, "Listen, this is how you run a church: is with a plurality of elders." So the constructs are necessary, but they are to be the animating core of them, the thing that flows through them that makes them alive, is the relationship aspect, right? Relationship with one another and relationship with God. And I just think it's funny because, and this is leading to a question, I promise, is just maybe in about 10 minutes.
Yeah. That's okay.
So having worked with different denominations in the UK, it's interesting how one of the things that we sort of lean towards as humans is building structures, constructs, and you know, you guys have used different phrases. You've used the phrases like you said, ministry structures, and constructs of ministry, trellis, and it's such a human thing. Is well, we need to build a trellis, right? We need to go off and build a trellis. But then it seems to me like a key pattern of human behavior is then the trellis must be maintained. And that becomes the point of the organization.
We so they refer to as like institutional protection in certain ways,
right?
You know, that sort of thing.
And it becomes about we need to maintain the constructs, and that's what everything needs to be. Now, constructs need to be maintained. Right. You want to maintain a healthy ecclesiology founded from Scripture. Like you've got, like you want to do that. You want to keep repairing it, etc. But like that sort of part of that moving away, as you said, 30 years ago, and suddenly now we're here. Is we have these 10 roles that always need to be filled. We have these 10 ministries that we always need to be running. So it seems like part of revitalization is sitting down and reviewing those structures from time to time, you know, semi-regularly, and having a process where you do that, where as a pastor, you keep your ear to the ground and you have a feel for what's going on in the church, and you begin to sense that this is perhaps not quite what we need, or, you know, perhaps this is becoming unhealthy, or, you know, you have some kind of sense of that. And then you began to talk about your final C was conflict, because
that was number 4, right?
It's number 4.
Sorry, your fourth C was conflict, because then the issue then becomes, my sense is that this structure needs to change, but there's a person occupying this structure for whom this is maybe their livelihood, or they have some of their identity founded in this. And I have to now my sense is that things need to move around and the constructs need to change for the health of the church. Right. How do you do that?
Well, I think one of the things to note is what's missing many times that leads a church into decline and a lack of health, or missing as a church moves forward in healthy growth, is all of these various aspects or parts that are essential to seeing life come to a people are missing. So it's a reductionism where folks only focus on convictions, or they only focus on the constructs, or they're all about doing life together, or community, or about this thick culture. Yeah. Or they're just overrun with conflict, you know, or whatever the fifth C we'll get to is. But you have to know this is how the dynamics. This is what goes into the life of the church. These are the various characteristics that need to be considered, and then this leads to how do you actually make various structural changes, or you know, construct changes. How do you actually facilitate those?
So I think going right back to the beginning, in terms of a revitalization process, the reality is you are stepping into a situation where you're going to engage in some sort of conflict.
Sure, yeah.
And you've got to be okay with that.
Yeah.
You've got to be okay with that. I think if you're going to go into pastoral ministry, you've got to be okay with that.
Right.
Because the gospel itself brings a point of conflict for every person in their thinking and in their heart and the situation. Of course it does. So you've got this ongoing issue of conflict. The issue is, how do you manage whether the conflict that you're stepping into is good conflict or bad conflict.
Right, yeah.
So you could go into a church revitalization and cause a lot of bad conflict because you're not patient, you're not loving, you're not caring, you're not considered, you've not come with an element of conviction, you're not honoring of the past. Because I think that's also important, especially if it's not sinful. And I think, and therefore, but at the same time, so therefore you can create a lot of bad conflict, but also you can step in and actually not step into what I would call good conflict.
That's right, yeah.
Good conflict. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers."
Yes. Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Blessed are the peacemakers.
Right.
And
he also said, to your point, he said, I actually came to bring a sword. And divide people. That's right. Right down the middle, which is part of the peacemaking.
Of course it
is.
It's
good conflict.
Well, we step into reconciliation for the sake of, step into the conflict for the sake of that reconciliation. And I think that's so important when it comes to church revitalization. You've got to be prepared to step into that and be patient and loving and kind. Now, what's interesting, it's stepping in. What you've got to remember is you're stepping in with people. You want to think well of people, and you're stepping in with people who love Jesus.
Right.
Right? You want to assume they love Jesus.
That's right.
They love this church, and they really want it to work.
Yeah, that's right.
So now they may be getting it all wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And you need to show them and help them. So that's
the charity pieces. I mean,
so
you and I talking. It's very huge, and especially a lot of younger pastors, maybe older. Maybe it's not respective of age, but I think having proper charitable assumptions about the saints.
Just think well of
very
people.
Important.
It helps.
And especially a lot of Reformed doctrinally minded guys are always on their heads on a swivel for the wolves, and so any insubordination, any deficiencies of life in Christ, your first thought should not be, this is probably a covert wolf trying to tear everybody up. No, this is probably a wonderful, sweet saint who wants to follow Christ and love them and you're there to provide wonderful help and assistance and patient guidance and care. So your assumption is that those who profess Christ actually love him and want the good things. Not that everybody's actually covertly subversive. So you're not on kind of bad witch hunts for doctrinal heretics all the time, or subversive, those who are trying to divide the flock, that sort of thing.
That's right. But and then so when in the conflict situation, so you're going to have conversations to help people, to walk with people, to engage with people, but also being willing, because some of those things are preference issues as well.
Right.
They are. We came with a group of younger people and a group of older people. There's like 20 years between, like a 20-year gap in between the two groups. And the younger folks are coming with as many preferences.
Oh, that's right.
And thinking this is what it looks like. So it's also stepping in and listening and hearing and thinking and just being aware. Okay, and also what is beautiful about these things?
Right.
What is beautiful about these things? Now, I think what you have to do in church revitalizations is that a lot of churches, in fact, all churches have this, but a lot of churches will have what I would call the sacred cow issues.
Yeah, sure.
So those sacred cows that can never be touched, never be changed. And
what are some of those in your church, Steve?
In our context?
No.
Now?
No,
Should we go? Should we go?
Don't answer.
Should we go? I get in trouble.
No, don't answer.
I get in trouble.
But you're right. There's a certain
But there are certain things that could never be touched. And I think we need to be open as leaders to be able to address those things.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the constructs that the Bible's clear about.
No, that's right. Yeah.
I'm talking about the preference issues and the way we do certain things that need to be worked through. So part of conflict is actually working out how you kill those things.
As you were talking, I always think the good and bad conflict category is wonderful because we have our convictions. We have this good news from all the scriptures that creates a new people, and then we have certain constructs that help facilitate that life that should lead first and foremost to good conflict.
Yes.
The primacy of good conflict over bad conflict has to be is worth noting, because good conflict, you could also possibly state another way, is just good old growth pains.
Yeah.
So these are wonderful growing pains as God's at work in us, and we're meeting the challenges that are before us to actually love everyone, see new people enveloped into the church, disciple everyone well, given their seasons, circumstances that they're coming from. This produces good tension, good conflict, good growth pains. That conflict is not a bad thing, but it is conflict though. Because we're going to have a lot of different ways or adjustments that need to be made. Maybe we need to make a staffing change. So this role that you were in at this season, we may need to make shifts in order for us to accommodate better the work that's before us. Mm-hmm. And those are opportunities for tension, stress, strain, conflict, if you will. But that's all forms of actually good conflict. And so the primacy of good conflict actually frames, I think, the sacred cows, because as there's good health, good growth, good conflict, those actually work to surface organically in the life of the church the areas of bad conflict, the sacred cows, because those will get squeezed on and exposed through good circumstances, not where you're just trying to turn over every single rock and go ahead and pick a fight. The natural bad conflict will come as you're pursuing good growth and normal good growth pains. Then those sacred cows actually, we've at least seen that tends to be the best avenue where the most people are actually able to come to realize that maybe some of these areas of sacred cowness maybe need to shift a little bit. And then it's you have more people on board to see, oh, well, this is not much this is actually just a regular old cow. We shouldn't have it as a sacred cow. It's just something that maybe we can make adjustments.
Yeah,
those changes are easier.
Just to as an example. One was we had a Friday morning coffee morning.
Okay,
but it was just they'd open up the building. And sweet older folks would come and have a coffee and they'd love it, and there would be non-believers there and stuff like that, and it was wonderful. And it was wonderful for them, but it was interesting because you could just feel the tension of why aren't some of the younger people coming along to this? Because if some more young people come, and it was interesting because in light of where we're at, it was and it was like, you never touch that because we're a church, you do a coffee morning. That's what you do.
Yeah, right.
And then it was interesting over time, the lady that was leading that came to me and said, I think it's time for us to stop this.
Yeah, there we
go. In light of all
these
these other things, I think it's time to stop, because all these people are connected into the life of church in a different way and a more meaningful way. And she came to realize that. And it was wonderful. It was one, and she'd been serving in that context for many, many years. The other one was how we take communion. So,
well, I was thinking as you're talking to, like, Philippians 2 points out, says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit or vain glory, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves. Absolutely. So the orientation even towards this is what that lady modeled wonderfully is how do I set aside my preferences?
That's right.
For the betterment of the body? And are these constructs, these ministries, these areas, these programs, are they actually the most preferred means by which the overall body's being built up? When the congregation has that mindset,
that's right,
then it makes it a lot easier.
That's right.
To see these things. The second example, though.
And the second example is how we do communion. So within the Brethrens, they have a full service, breaking of bread. You're not allowed in the building if you're not a believer. Okay. So talk about fencing the table. We felt that you fenced the building. But then, and that was done at a separate time. It wasn't during the what they would call the family service or gospel service. Okay. So if a lot of the women didn't go because they were looking after children, because that was in the evening. And it was interesting. It was only over time that you're able to, if I'd have gone in and stopped that and changed that straight away, I'd have lost everybody. Yeah. And it wasn't sinful, it just wasn't best.
That's right, yeah.
So therefore, you've just got to take time to lovingly, because people have even said to me, oh, that's the first thing, I would have gone straight in and just sorted it. I said, well, you wouldn't have been there.
No, you wouldn't have been
there. Because
that's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, you just wouldn't have been there. So you've got to, you've got to take time. And actually, John, 18 months it took us. 18 months. My wife didn't take communion for 18 months.
And that you might even say it's fairly rapid that you made the change that fast. I mean, this is where idealism is the enemy of real ministry. Yeah, you have to function in in relationship with one another, bringing them along. It's not the truths of how we think about communion and what it is as an ordinance or a sacrament of the church and its function in the life of the body. Doctrinally, that's very clear. Helping everybody work to embrace in that. is part of doing real ministry. 1 Corinthians 11 wouldn't be written. Paul's saying, you guys are trying to celebrate communion. It's a part of your overall landscape, but these wild party nights where some people are excluded and they can't come out, some people can't eat, some people get drunk and overdoing it. We got to get this sorted. Yeah. And so you have to be realistic in how you're actually caring for these folks.
I would just think that such a key, basically what we're talking about is just the really basic currency of how trust works.
Right.
Which is that you raised the example before of the guy who goes in and changes all the furniture at the beginning. To me, and I don't know, maybe this is different in different places, different places. Maybe it's culturally contingent, but I feel like I think that in Liverpool...
It's okay if you have feelings. I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
I've just been talking to Doug Pondo, and he's been telling me the feelings are bad.
He has feelings as well. He just, sometimes they're a little bit more reserved.
That's right. That's right.
I think in Liverpool, if you went in and changed the furniture first, people wouldn't trust you.
Not a chance.
No.
People are just like, this guy isn't... So maybe in some places they would. Maybe there are some places where they think, he came in and we've had this terrible furniture for years. Yeah. And he came in and he changed it and it looks nicer and maybe he's for us and this is great. But if you came in Liverpool and you brought in a team and you changed the furniture and you made it look slick,
I have to be honest a little bit as we're talking. I don't know, but one of the things Grimké Europe's been going well. We've gotten everything started. I'm reflecting back, one of the first things that we did was buy these couches.
Buy these couches?
It wasn't changing the furniture. We just kind of initially we're going to get some furniture and see what happens. So I'm not sure about it. I'm rebuilding trust as we speak now.
No, it was really helpful. It was fine. Don't worry. To be fair, you did
we had a relationship.
That's like after nearly 15 years relationship. Don't worry.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
It's also really important because we had nowhere to sit. So thank you for the couches.
Well, yeah, they worked out great. Yeah,
we need these Americans with their.
I didn't know this was like a subtle intervention that I'd entered into.
These Americans coming in with their couches, and their rugs. But like having this very basic understanding of what trust is, and that I would imagine that if you're going to come in and bring changes, and the first thing that you need to build is trust. These people need to know you, know that you love them, and see by the way that you do the main things well. And the beauty of Scripture and of God's plan for us and for how we're to live our lives is that it is for our flourishing and it is right. And it is good. And so my sense would be that to come in and to begin to implement changes and to begin to do the things that Christ says we should do really, really well, that creates trust.
Yeah.
You can make an argument that changing the furniture is God's plan for you. We should have good furniture. It should be good. It should be a comfortable place for people. It should be welcoming. Right. You can make all those arguments theologically, but first and foremost, building the trust.
It's weightier matters, right?
Yeah.
It's the weightier things. So the lesser things need to be included, but the weightier things.
And those lead to flourishing. And part of flourishing is trust. It's reconciliation between people. It's people loving one another and feeling like they know one another, such that when you then begin to then bring other changes, they're sort of like, well, we know this guy and we know he loves us and we know that this is scriptural and we're experiencing flourishing. Things are better now than they were. And therefore, okay.
I don't want us to get out of time before we get to the 5th C, though.
Okay.
I know. So the conflict is there, and
so we've got
it's a necessary. Even from a pastoral leadership level, we've mentioned that. And the last thing I've mentioned about conflict is it is intrinsic to loving the sheep well.
100%.
And so if you're conflict averse or don't like working through conflict, then pastoral ministry is not going to be for you. You're actually going to be a hindrance to the overall health of the body because you're not helping folks make the necessary challenging changes to see Christ formed in them. So too many times I think decline happens or revitalization becomes necessary because pastors don't want to actually step to good conflict or even bad conflict that's necessary
of course,
to actually for the betterment of the body.
That's right. And I think it's interesting. A lot of churches that I've walked with over the years that have spoken to us about revitalization.
Right.
a lot of in their histories, there's been those issues of bad conflict that's caused all sorts of major issues, or the failure to step into good conflict.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
At a leadership level, and deal with certain things, brushing them under the carpet.
Right.
The bottom line is there's always going to be the bump in the carpet.
Sure, yeah.
You're going to trip over at some point.
That's right.
So I think that's really important. I think, to take us to the 5C, so you've got conviction, culture, constructs, conflict, continuously. And it's not like, and the next is continuously. So there's this element of, it's not like a one and done. So what I describe is that at Cornerstone Church, we've replanted the church once, but we've revitalized 14 times. Yes. I think I've used that phrase before on a different podcast, but because we're continuously sort of assessing, looking at our convictions, not to change our convictions, but to be reminded of what that looks like. And then culture changes.
Right, that's right.
Our culture changes. Not the culture, I think there are clear cultural distinctives that we need to be as the church.
Yeah, that's right.
I think wherever we are, it's there. I think they're biblical. But the culture that we find ourselves in, an eldership brings on a new elder, the culture changes. New people become Christians. You go through a global pandemic, the culture changes. You know what I mean? So we've got to revisit all the time. In light of our conviction, okay, what are the constructs? Right. What are the ongoing conversations we've got to have and engage with and stuff like that? So you have this continuous thing all the time. And I think where churches get it wrong is they just think, well, this is the lane we're running in, and we'll continue to. If we just keep doing this will be fine. And it's been able to help the churches and help churches figure out how you have a way of thinking, and a way of being, and a way of leading that is biblical and lived out in the context of where we find ourselves. And they're continuously just readdressing that all the time.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was thinking, so we all come up as pastors and preachers with, endless alliterations. Kind of like the term cultivation comes to mind. Like the church is very much like a garden.
That's right.
It requires constant cultivation. So if you're going to see life formed in a people, or new life continues to come into a people, has to be constant. You have to cultivate it. There's constant pruning. If not, it unintentionally a church finds itself being suffering the consequences of apathy and negligence.
That's right.
And it creates a reactive posture in the church that's actually, instead of proactively pursuing the good things on a continual basis that it should be about in the life of the church, assessing, well, how are we honoring Christ? How are we living? What are we doing? And why are we doing it? And is it most beneficial given the season? It actually ends in a negligence where you're not assessing, the weeds creep into the garden. And then you find yourself in a reactionary posture, kind of like cleaning up things, after things get in disarray. And instead of proactively pursuing. And so it creates a more of a tension in the body through apathy in these areas where proactive, continuous work of cultivation is what's needed to see life come to the church.
And just, one more thing that I think I want to say is, so that's been our experience of, and my experience and the experience of the team of people in terms of what it looks like to be in a revitalization that's the church that you're leading. I think it becomes, there's a different thing and a slightly different approach when you're asked by a church for their support in helping them revitalize. So I go and help and walk with them, but I'm not going to be their pastor. So what does it look like to lovingly walk with elders in a church that have to make those decisions?
Yeah.
And I don't think, people might disagree with me, it's very easy for me to go in and go, I could spot it within 15 minutes.
Sure, yeah.
What needs to happen. But I don't think I need to tell them that. I need to help them find that.
That's right.
And I think that's really, there's certain things that they're not going to get, but and I think there's a coaching element of trying to help.
Yeah.
Because if we just go and say you have to do X, Y, and Z, what would actually do is, I think, potentially is undermining the fact that God has appointed those men to lead that church.
Yeah.
And you've got to come and say, well, you are responsible. You're going to give an account. Can I coach you and help you figure this out? Yeah. And we're committing to walk with you and help you. But there's an element of, I can't tell you what to do.
Right.
Because it's a different church in a different context. And I think as those who are leading churches that may be in situations where they can help others in their communities, I think there's a way of thinking through how you coach, how you help. And I actually think 3 of the 5 C's are helpful.
Yeah.
The first 3, because you're probably not going to walk through the conflict because you're not going to be the one there Monday to Friday, and all over the weekend. But you can help them figure out those things to put them in a really healthy spot. So when a young guy comes in or someone else comes in to run that, that's a helpful means. It's more of a coaching element than it is a management consultant telling people this is what you need to do. Because I think we're on dangerous ground if that's what we think our approach to helping other churches revitalize is the right way.
The 6th C is coaching. We need that. And
we need to throw that in.
The 7th C for our time is closure.
Nice.
And guys, really appreciate the time today. It's been wonderful. A lot more to be said, but the Lord grows His church.
Amen.
And we get to serve and see Him do that, and it's wonderful. So
great.
Thank you guys very much for the time today.
Thank you.